The 2022 NHL draft was pretty wild, and overall, there were a lot of interesting picks. I thought there were a lot of guys that went way later than they should have, and there were quite a few pretty solid steals, I think, particularly for the Carolina Hurricanes. But there were also a few guys that I thought were drafted way too high. Although I will say, going back over the draft results, there weren't as many of these guys as I expected. Maybe some in the later rounds, but especially in the later rounds, if you just want to take a swing on a guy, maybe it's a massive reach, but personally, I don't really mind that. Now, the first guy I am going to talk about here in a pick that I think was a guy who went a bit too high, and especially the way this team acquired this player by trading up for him, really didn't like that move for, of course, the Arizona Coyotes, and they selected Connor Geekie 11th overall. Yes, I know you guys, well, not all you guys love Connor Geekie, but every time I talk about Connor Geekie in a negative way, I get a lot more negative attention, a lot more dislikes, that kind of stuff, negative comments, but I just don't like Connor Geekie that much. If your opinion differs, that's fine. I'm more than open to the conversation, but Connor Geekie to me is not a top 10 talent. Of course, he did go 11th overall, so technically not top 10, but especially trading up for him and giving up 27, 34, and 45. I mean, I had Geeky at 28th on my board. Now, he wouldn't have gone that low. He probably would have got, if they didn't trade up for him, he probably would have gone somewhere in the middle of the first round. But my philosophy is that if you're going to trade up for a guy, especially trading up that many spots, 27 to 11, you should be going for a guy who has a ton of upside. Connor Geekie just doesn't have the upside for me. I see him as a solid third line center, probably, but honestly, he really has to work on his skating. His skating is a major issue. His pace is pretty poor as well. So while he is a great playmaker at the junior level, that is only going to translate to a certain extent at the NHL if his pace doesn't improve. And really, that is not as easy of a skill to develop as, say, something like your shot. So I don't have a ton of confidence in Connor Geekie. I don't think he's as safe as a pick as a lot of other people do, and I don't think the upside is there as well. So Connor Geekie, for me, kind of one of the worst picks of the draft in general, especially the first round. Although I will say this, he definitely was not the worst pick in the first round, and we'll get to him later. The next player I want to talk about, and another one of the worst picks of the draft, in my opinion, was the Sharks drafting centerman Philip Bystedt 27th overall. So this is the first pick that they made in that trade down with Arizona. And of all the guys that I'm going to talk about today, this is probably the least bad pick. But considering who was on the board, I just really didn't like this pick at all. And I didn't really like pick 34 either, when they got Cameron Lund. But I'm not going to be talking about him in this video. I'm just going to be talking about Philip Bystedt here. And he's big. He's 6'4", 205 pounds as a centerman. He scored 49 points in 40 games at the J20 level last year in Sweden, 2 points in 15 SHL games. I mean, not terrible. Opinions on this guy seems to be a little bit all over the place, though. I have noticed some people think Bystedt is a guy who doesn't have much upside, but is relatively safe bet to play in the NHL. Other guys think he's a riskier pick who has more upside. So I haven't seen enough of him to really comment on either of those things. I do think he has a pretty nice shot, though, and he is a good skater for his size, which I do like. But considering players like Brad Lambert and Jagger Firkus were still on the board, I easily would have taken one of those guys, and maybe even a guy like Seamus Casey I could have seen taken here. Or if you really want to go for a reach, maybe Lane Hudson, probably a guy they could have gotten at 34 as well. All those guys, well, Lambert wasn't available at 34, but they could have gotten those guys at 34 as well. Overall, I just really didn't care for this pick. The third guy I want to talk about is probably, for my money, the worst pick of the draft. And I kind of hate to beat up on the Coyotes here, but what can I say? They drafted this guy. They drafted Connor Geekie. Now, Geekie at least is, I'm very certain, will play in the NHL. Maverick Lameroo here, which they drafted, or who they drafted, I should say, 29th overall. Probably an NHL player. Really, he's just big. He's size. He's 6'7", 198. And that's about it. Is he a good skater? No. Is he a good skater for his size? Kind of. I mean, guys this big, generally speaking, aren't great skaters, and that is definitely true with Lameroo. He's okay given his size. Some people think he's a really good skater for his size. I don't quite see it. He scored 24 points in 54 games in the Q this year, was a minus 30 as well, 69 penalty minutes. Now, this is kind of going into advanced analytics and like draft models and stuff, but players that take a lot of penalties generally underperform their draft positions. Large players generally underperform their draft positions, believe it or not. And yeah, so, and guys that score under half a point per game in the Quebec League, even as a defenseman, that is basically means he has no projectable offense to the NHL level. I don't know. I don't see it with Lameroo. I had him barely ranked in my top 100 at like 96 or something, and honestly, I was tempted to get him out of there. If I remade my top 100 today, he probably wouldn't have made it. But yeah, I will say he's likely to play at least a few NHL games because of one, where they drafted him. They're going to want to give him a shot at least, and two, his size. Like he can bring some usefulness to your team with that size, but overall, I just really did not like this pick, especially again considering guys that were still on the board. I mean, Brad Lambert went one pick after this guy. I mean, you're telling me you'd rather have Lameroo than take a chance on Lambert? I don't know about that one, Chief. The fourth player I'm going to talk about today is Dimitry Bouchelnikov. Now, this was a Steve Yzerman pick, 52nd overall, so I could very well end up eating my words on this one because we all know Stevie Y's draft history is pretty dang solid, but at 52, I did not see it for Bouchelnikov. He is an overager, a Russian overager. He scored 75 points in 56 games in the MHL this year, 14 points in 9 playoff games, which sounds impressive, but the MHL is really not much of a quality league at all. His defensive game is pretty bad, and he has a good shot, but as an overager, his point production in that league really isn't that impressive to me. And really, the main thing I have with him, because it's not so much the player, it's the position. Like he definitely should have been drafted. I think I had him at the tail end of my top 100 or just outside my top 100. But if you're going to go for a Russian player, I mean, you could have gotten Gleb Trikazov, who I had top 10. He was still available here. If you want to reach for a Russian player, then why take the overager? You could take Gleb Trikazov, who had relatively similar production in the MHL this year, especially in the playoffs. I believe he had 18 points in 12 games, or roughly something like that. He was absolutely dominant for us in the playoffs. He's another guy who doesn't play very good defense. They're kind of similar in that fashion. And Trikazov also has a good shot. He's a better playmaker. He's just a more dominant player in general. So really, I don't understand the pick given the options that were available. Finally, the last player I'm going to talk about here is Philip Nordberg, drafted 64th overall by the Ottawa Senators. This guy is kind of a classic Senators pick, completely off the board. Some people had him ranked, but very low in the draft. Elite Prospects had a draft profile for him, but they did not have him ranked in their top 121 players. He is big at 6'4", 207 pounds, so size good, I guess. That seems to be a lot of teams' philosophy in general. He scored 27 points in 42 games at the Swedish J20 level this season, which I haven't seen him play, so I can't comment. Well, I have seen him, but not a lot. I can't comment really too much on how much of that I think is really projectable. He did play 9 games in Hockey Allsvenskan, where he scored 0 points, which isn't a great sign. And I will say, generally speaking, 27 points in 42 games isn't that impressive, even for a second round selection for the Swedish J20 League as a defender. He also had 88 penalty minutes in those 42 games. And again, guys who take a lot of penalties generally underperform their draft position. Guys that have a lot of size generally underperform their draft position. And again, there were better players available. I mean, you could say that for almost every pick in any given draft. You could say, oh, well, you could argue this guy was better. But really, 64th overall is still a pick that I think has pretty good value. And they could have gotten a guy like Vladimir Grudin in here. If you wanted a defenseman, a very different defenseman, but in my opinion, a much, much better one. I believe Lane Hudson was available. I think he actually went 65th overall, one pick afterwards. Who else went late? I can't remember exactly who was available, but I know for sure there were definitely better players available than Nordberg here. So he could be a decent bottom pair defenseman later, like 3 or 4 years from now. But overall, I just really didn't like this pick. That is it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you do believe it deserved a like, do give it a like. That really helps me out. Leave a comment. What do you think about some of these guys? I'm sure some of you are going to be leaving comments about Connor Geekie, which I am prepared for. If you want to stick around and watch another video, I will put another one down below. Yesterday, I released my top 10 steals of the draft, so you just saw some of the worst picks of the draft, in my opinion. Go check out who I thought were my best picks if you want to. If you don't, that's great too. Wherever you guys, have a nice day.